Welcome back and thank you for joining me. I'm Melissa with Sentimental Salvage and Design, and today we are going to work on a sort of Valentine's Day kinda craft, and we're going to be using one of the newest Roycycled stencils. This one is called Bottles and Beakers. So, and I have this, which is just a board, a craft board I got at it's either Dollar Tree or Dollarama. I don't remember which one. I'm assuming Dollar Tree. But I've had this in my stash for a while and I'm just going to use that. So first things first is, because this is very, it's very porous, I want to seal it with a good coat of Big Top, DIY Paints Big Top, because I want to have a little bit more leeway when it comes to applying and removing color, because I kind of have an idea on how I want to do this. So this is DIY Paints Big Top, and I'm just going to brush on a coat of this. Just to give me that buffer layer so that the paint that I apply doesn't just soak in, because then I won't be able to remove it how I want to. I know that sounds weird, but I promise there's a method to my madness. Okay, I'm just going to grab some water. It's always good to have a little bit of water handy, especially when you're using any of the sealers, whether that's Big Top or the clear patina or any of the patinas, so that you can just pop your brush in water so it doesn't dry on there. Okay, so I'm just going to take the heat tool . Okay, that feels better. It's got a little bit of slippery. Okay, so I want to kind of plan this out a little bit. I haven't used this stencil yet, obviously. Brand new, still in the package. So my plan is to use this bottle, but I'm gonna have it laying on its side and a little bit off. So I'm going to, so that this is kind of a table that it's laying on. So I have to do some kind of a base here. Just something painted across here. So let's go with weathered wood, I think, if I have enough. Some of my paint selection's getting a little slim here. I'm gonna have to start opening up new jars. There's not very much left in here at all. Just a little wee bit. Weathered wood is a nice kind of a black-brown kind of color. So let's go with that first. Let's just grab a new brush. A little bit of water. DIY paint is super thick, so always remember that you can add water to make it go a lot further. Just trying to get a fairly straight line because, like I said, this is going to represent a tabletop. I'm going to try to do my background as best I can first. Okay, so I need another coat because it's kind of streaky. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add some water right into my jar and just kind of swoosh that around. And that should give me enough, I hope. To get a second coat on here. Okay, so I think that's going to work pretty good. And then for the background of the regular, I was wanting to use a little bit of green, just slight, almost like a watercolor effect a little bit. I need another brush. Let's try this one. So I'm just trying to get it kind of as close to my tabletop as I can. So I switched brushes because this one has softer bristles and I can get a little bit more kind of a gentle coverage without any major brush marks. Okay, so that gives me kind of a subtle color, which I am okay with. Okay, let's give this a dry again. There's a lot of drying time. Okay, I need a little bit more green. I'm just winging this, guys. add a little bit of green. Not a lot. And using the water to kind of create there. Now it's not so flat. Use my bigger one. Okay, now the stencil part. So I want this to look like it's kind of laying on this table. So I'm going to tape that right there because I don't want it to move around. And I'm going to tape off parts of the stencil that I don't want to accidentally apply to my project. If you're using really tiny, fine stencil brushes, you don't have to do this because you can pinpoint a little bit more. But I'm not using tiny little stencil brushes, so. And I want this to look like clear glass, so I'm going to go with white. Whoops. That's a lot. Okay, and I'm going to use this brush, and I'm just going to tape the bristles just to make it just stable. It gives them a little bit more stability so it doesn't like flop all over the place. Okay, and remember with stenciling, less is more. You can always go back and give it another coat, but if you have too much paint on your brush, it is going to bleed underneath your stencil. You're not going to get nice crisp stencil lines. So always be aware of that when you're stenciling, especially on an uneven piece like this where you're actually putting a little bit more pressure. So see how that turned out? It looks kind of cool, I think, which that kind of works. So this gives me the outline. And now I'm going to go and I'm going to leave this here because I want to be able to flip that back down. And I'm going to go and I'm going to want to take away some of this paint that's in here. I'm pulling off paint to kind of try to give this a little bit more of a translucent, like a bottle would be. And you guys, I'm not an artist, So I'm experimenting, and this is a brand new brush, and it is losing bristles like you would not believe. These bristles are just falling out of this thing. Okay, now let's go back over this. I'm actually going to give that a quick little dry. Protect your stencils from your heat tools if you're using, because you don't want them to melt and kind of shrivel up with the heat. Okay, I'm going to go back with my white. And crisp up those lines. Okay, so now I want a little bit of, tiny bit of pink for that label. This is a really pale pink. It's petticoat pink from DIY Paint. So you can't even really tell that that's pink. So now just to give a little bit of oomph to that label, I'm actually going to go with a little bit of cherry picked. It's just got that slight kind of purpley just to help the edges on this label stand out. That's better. Okay. And I think I'm done with the stencil. I don't think I need to keep this on here anymore. So now what I'm going to do is grab a liner brush. I know I have one here somewhere. There we go. And I'm just going to wet that. And I'm just going to go and touch this up. So I'm just wanting to crisp up the edges of my label. Using these liner brushes is practice. They take practice. I haven't used one for a long time. Not that I had ever mastered their use to begin with. But they do work really well for these fine lines because they hold enough paint. So you're able to make a nice crisp line because you're not constantly refilling your brush. It holds enough paint for you to be able to do that. And you don't want to leave them standing in your water either, because then your bristles get all bent and weird. Nobody wants that. So I'm going to want to kind of do the same thing with my jar itself. I want the solution inside to be kind of a pinky tinge, but it's got to be really liquid. And I don't know. So it appears like there's water in there, or not water, but a potion. So I'm going to make this really watery. I'm going to have to come back and touch up my label again. So I'm aiming for kind of a translucent pink liquid. Inside this bottle. And you have to be really careful with DIY paint over DIY paint, because this nice beautiful brown I have here, this dark brown, that is DIY paint as well. And as I play with this much water on top of it, it's reactivating. So if I play with it too much, it's just going to start mixing that brown into this pink, which is not what I want to happen. So you have to be very, very careful and aware of that happening. I'm just playing. I would love to explain to you what to do and how to do it, but I don't know, so I'm just playing, experimenting, and hoping that this works how I want it to work. Sometimes checking it out on the camera. On my overhead, I can see it a little bit better than I can see it right here. So see how I'm getting this line? That's caused by the board. Like these are a bunch of little boards put together, and that's what's causing that. So I'm just gonna let that dry, and then I'll come back at that later to kind of touch that up. But I think this is kind of working out okay over here. It kind of looks like there's a sort of a translucent potion in there, I think. I think so. It's not looking terrible to me. So I'm going to hit this with my little heat tool so I can come back in and hopefully disguise that variation in level I've got happening here. I'm gonna have to touch up my label a little bit. That's okay. And then I'm just gonna go with some more water kind of up top and maybe smudge that inside white line just a little bit. You can kind of manipulate when you've got pooled paint, water. You can manipulate it with your heat tool. This one doesn't have a lot of pressure, so it's actually a little more forgiving. But if you're using a blow dryer or the big heat tool, you can really push it around, and it kind of gives you more of an organic flow, which is kind of cool. Okay, so I'm going to want to pull this a little bit. So now I want to use stamps, and I want to use 2 different stamp sets by IOD. At least I'm going to try to. One is going to be swoosh. So that is this one, the script. But we got to see if it's going to work. I'm going to quickly give this a dry first. before I start playing with stuff and I smear it. Then I'm going to be mad. Okay. The only issue with this stamp set is that it's really big, and sometimes I've found it just doesn't work perfectly for what I need it for, but I think I'll be okay with this. I think. I always, when using this stamp set, I always try to get the angle right on the letters so that it looks cohesive. I know that's really hard to see. I think I need this to be a little bit higher. So the next one, I was originally going to use typesetting, but now I think I'm going to use letterpress. Just because I have these smaller letters. So this is letterpress, and letterpress has 3 different fonts, and they're a smaller size, so they're perfect for crafting. And I'm going to use this middle one. And when you're laying out or planning out your stamps, you want to make sure that you're applying your stamps face down. So the actual ink side down, or paint, or whatever you're stamping with. So in this case, when you are using 2 of one letter, and I have 2 stamp sets, but if you don't, a lot of people don't, unless you use these stamps a lot. It just makes things a little bit easier. But if you don't, you can just, I'm going to show you, I've got this laid out already, spaced. So now I'm just going to take the letter O and I'm going to move it over here. And that just helps, that P will stay there, and it'll help me to be able to line up for my next letter. So I just have to lift this a bit. So I think I want to move the whole thing over a bit, which is going to, there's a really, oh, I might be able to make that work. I think that's a little bit more balanced. Okay, now I'm going to grab a thin mount, and I've got pieces of them That's not going to be big enough. So I cut thin mounts into smaller chunks like this, just so that they're easier to work on smaller projects. You don't have to use the big whole sheet. And in this case, it's almost exactly the width of this, so it's going to make it really easy to line things up. So what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to line up the two sides. So I'm going to line up this side and the top edge. And that is crooked, but I'm going to make it work. So I'm just going to put this aside for a second. I better put my lid on my pink so it doesn't dry up. I don't want to get rid of all my paints I've got going on here, just in case I've got some touch-ups to do. So now with this, I'll try to make this easier for you guys to see what I'm doing. I don't think that makes it any easier. Okay, so this word, because I'm using the swoosh stamp, it doesn't have to be perfectly straight. All I'm worried about is that my letter angle is kind of on par, so that you don't have one letter going this way, one letter going that way. It just makes your stamp look kind of disjointed. Another thing I prefer with this stamp is to overlap the letters. See how I've got the L? I've actually got the O on top of the L. That's so that when it's stamped, it looks like script, which is the look that I'm going for. So I'm going to show you how to deal with that in a sec. But this word, I want this word to be straight. So my P, I'm just going to line up my letters with this line that's right on the top here. So my P is good. I'm going to line up my T. Well, I'm going to put my O first. So now remember, we're working backwards. Our letters are ink side up in this case. So this word I don't want to be all kind of willy-nilly and all over the place. I want it to be straight. So I'm trying my best to get this straight. With my head in the way, so you guys can't see perfect. Okay. Try not to put my head in the way. And again, I'm going to grab this O and move it over here because I've got my spacing here, but I want to make sure it is lined up on this end. Not a big deal if it's the end of the word, your duplicate letter, but when it's in the middle, that's a really easy way to do it. Okay, perfect. I'm thinking on what color I'm going to stamp this with. So now what I'm going to do with this stamp, remember how I said it's all overlapped? I'm going to pull out every second letter. So I know that looks weird now, but it's going to be okay. Now what color are we going to stamp? I'm actually going to move this down so my initial lining up of this top edge. I'm going to ignore that now, and I'm going to focus on lining up, just centering actually this. So as long as I have one side lined up, my word here is going to remain straight on my project, as long as your project is straight. So I think I'm going to go in with the charcoal gray ink. Stone gray it's called actually. Only because it's lighter. It's not as harsh as black, and I can go in with paint on top of that to kind of add some depth and some color. Ooh. I just have to find, here it is. So I think, let's just check this baby. Oh yeah. So because that is kind of rough, I'm just going to apply the ink on my stamp. And all I'm doing is just tapping up and down. I'm not rubbing it, I'm just tapping it on there. And not super hard. If you push really hard, you're just going to get ink all over the part of the stamp that you don't need ink. You're going to get some there anyways, but it's not a biggie. So now I'm just going to go and I'm going to clean up any of these edges, because I'm going to have to really push on this stamp, because the surface that I'm applying it to is really rough, really textured. So I don't want there to be any transfer of ink that I don't want. So I'm trying to alleviate that problem by just cleaning up my stamp as much as I can. Okay, so once you decide, you need to commit. So you can't now pick this up and shift it, because it won't work. I was going to use a brayer to push this, but I'm not going to. I'll just use my finger. And I'm putting some pressure only because of the nature of my project. And I'm not worried too much about these little tails, because I'm just going to be stamping over those anyways. So I just want to get the letters for sure, and especially these ones, because these guys are small. You always want to stabilize your stamp with one hand and then do your pressing with the other hand. So I'm just going to lift this to see where I need to apply more pressure. So right in there and right here. The only way you want to lift and reapply is if you are stabilizing your thin mount. You don't want to lift it right up and then want to put it right back down. Okay. I'm glad I went with the stone gray. So now I just take a baby wipe and I clean my stamps right after I use them. This works really good. when I use them in a, like if I'm using them during a workshop or something, I will leave them on the thin mount and I just scrub them with a silicone bristle brush and some mild, just some dish soap. And that cleans them up really, really well. But for the most part, this is my method. Okay, so I'm gonna put that aside. And then I'm just gonna grab a tiny, that's too tiny. Just a small piece of a thin mount. This is an older clear one that I have chopped up into little pieces. And I'm going to just place the O on here. And we're going to ink that O up. And then clean up any excess, especially if you've got it on the thin mount. So this is a prime example on where an acrylic stamping block would not work right, because this is very textured and it's very variated levels. An acrylic block is very rigid, so you wouldn't have the ability like you do with these flexible thin mounts to really push in those lower areas. That's what makes these so awesome. If you're doing like card making and stuff like that and scrapbooking where you're working on rigid flat surfaces all the time and on paper, then you're good to go. The acrylic blocks work perfect for that. Okay, so now be careful because your ink is wet. So you're going to remember kind of how this lined up. And I'm just going to, because the tail of this O, I don't want it to be like super bold and show. So I'm just going to lightly blot some of the ink kind of back so it blends better. And it's hard to see with the glare. Same thing, you want to commit. And my fingers are kind of sticky right now because, like damp sticky, because I was playing with that wet wipe a while ago. So I'm unable to slide that hand on the stamp very well. So I'm kind of just pushing. Okay, so let's stabilize and peek. All right, so I need a little bit more pressure here. The stabilize and peek is your best friend. Here we go. And now the E, same method. So this is how you get that cohesive kind of script, that flowy script look, is by pulling every second letter after you've set it up. And honestly, that's just how my brain works with this stamp. I like it better this way. So it's just how I do it. You can do each letter separately. You can have them all spread apart. It really is up to you. Okay, so stabilize and peak. You just want to be very, very careful that you're not shifting. Okay. I like that. That turned out good. And with the little bit of antiquing I've got going on, I don't even have to add any color, I don't think. I think it's good just the way it is. You can see because of the texture, the stamp doesn't get all the way, and that's perfect. So here's the O, that second O from the word potion. Same thing. Just apply your ink. Wipe any excess off. There we go. Love potion number 9. Just had a little bit of a panic thinking I spelled potion wrong. I have done that before. I have spelt things wrong stamping. It's like your brain forgets how to spell. Potion still looks weird to me. I think it's right though. So there we go. I think that is it. I am going to dry this with the heat tool so I can seal it, and then that's going to bring out even more color. I'm going to make the 9 on my number 9 a little bit thicker on that outside edge. That label's still not centered, but I'm not going to worry about it anymore. It makes my eye twitch, but I'm just going to have to get over it. Okay. So I am done with all my paints. I'm not going to be touching anything up, I don't think. If I do, it won't be the first time I've dug my paint stuff out of the garbage. But now what I'm going to do is seal it with Big Top. When you're applying over a stencil or stamping or something that you've done with a paint that will reactivate, you have to be or a paint inlay, you have to be very, very careful when applying that first bit of your clear coat. If you can spray it on, you can do that if that makes you feel more comfortable. What you can do for that is just get these little, this one has vinegar in it, but these are from the dollar store, and they're just tiny little spritzer bottles, and they're super cheap, so you can just throw them out when you're done versus trying to get all of the Big Top out of this mechanism, because if it dries in there, you're not going to be able to use it anyways. So I guess you can just keep it in there and then grab a new top from another bottle, and then you don't have to worry about it. But that's a really good way to spray it on if you don't trust yourself when it comes to brushing it. So, or if you brush, use a brush that has very soft bristles, and you want to just swipe it on originally. Sorry, I don't know what's happening with my voice. You don't want to do any excess brushing. So I'm just getting it covered. It's not perfect, but it's just covering that, and then that is going to be my protection, my buffer layer for when I come in and then apply the sealer over the whole thing as an actual protective coat. Especially here because I have a really dark brown here and there's white, and if I play with that too much, I'm going to move this brown and smear it all over this pretty pink and white that I have going on in this bottle, and I don't want that to happen. So swipe coat on, take your heat tool or your blow dryer, or if you're patient, you can just let it air dry before you come ahead and you do that second coat. Also, if you're using a heat tool to dry a sealer, you want to keep it moving because it will blister. So you don't want that to happen. And now we can take a little bit more time and actually apply your top coat with a little bit more care. And this is a decor piece. 2 coats is going to be more than enough. It's not a piece of furniture that you're going to be wiping off like a dresser or something. It's just a little piece that'll hang on the wall or sit on a shelf. And there you go. That is it. So I think that's kind of cute, a little bit different. It's just an idea that popped in my head, and I had to get it out on a project. And it's kind of fitting for Valentine's Day coming up. Thanks so much for hanging out with me while we create this project. I will put the full list of the products that I used in the description. And if you have any questions, as usual, feel free to ask away. You can email me, you can message me, or you can ask in the comments. Whatever works for you. And I'll be happy to help you out. Thanks again. See you next time.